Welcome back, friends. You're listening to Choose, Sip, Repeat. I'm your host, Christina Winkle. Today we are chatting with a longtime friend, Tony Collins, who has worked at numerous restaurants and bars in and around Tulsa. He was the beverage director for arguably the most successful restaurant in Oklahoma. Currently, and since 2019, he has chosen to share his knowledge of the industry by being a professor for OSU. On this episode, we are taking a closer look into the world of sparkling wine, specifically Professor Collins' favorite, champagne. Enjoy. Welcome. I wanted to do this funny joke, but now I feel like I've ruined it. But I wanted to say, welcome, Professor Jones. Collins.
We talked earlier about this Indiana Jones aspect. That movie's a very romanticized version of academia. Yeah. It's certainly a job like any other. That being said, I do think that I still like to go out and do research in the field.
Yes.
Not unlike
right.
Henry Indiana Jones.
Right, you got to get your hands dirty.
Yeah, they named the dog Indiana.
Right, right, Indiana the dog.
It's I do like my role in academia, and I've been here now since 2019. So,
yes, yeah. That's amazing, and I think of you as a professor through and through. That's exactly what I picture: is the tweed jacket and maybe a pipe. Professor Collins, lead the way, kind of type.
Yeah, I hate to break your bubble of that. I'm the cool professor who's wearing I'm wearing a flannel shirt and some jeans and some like hiker boots.
So you're like the Okie version of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, and I'm not this is probably not a spoiler. It's a pretty kind of buttoned up and staid atmosphere, and people doing real important research and actually changing the world. And I'm just like, hey, who wants to talk about wine or distilled spirits or something like?
Right.
Yeah. I'm a pretty popular guy on campus.
I can imagine.
But yeah, it's not. We're not saving the world doing this. We're just. I don't know. But I think we're beautifying the world with what we do here. Yeah,
absolutely. I would totally agree with that. Like, knowledge about our industry and all of, the array of topics is. People don't go home and talk about economics the way that they go home and talk about their, favorite restaurant. There's a reason for that.
I've always said one of the best reasons to be in the hospitality industry, restaurants, bars, whatever it is. There's so many occupations where we have to deal with. Like, for example, I don't want to have to call a plumber up. I don't have to call a lawyer up. If I have to interact with a roofer, or
right.
These are lucrative jobs and they're important jobs, whatever, blah blah blah. But if you're in the restaurant business or the bar business or whatever, they sit at your bar or sit in your section, and on a Friday night, they're opting into what you're selling already.
Right.
So it's kind of just your job not to muck it up and just give them what they want and show them a good time and give them some good food. And that's so rare. I think we take for granted that, no one to go to the doctor. No one wants to buy car insurance. Like, all this, people want to go eat and drink in nice places. And
right.
Have
Yeah.
a
No
good
one's
time.
getting real excited and putting on their best outfit to go to the bank. Right. They're like, oh, gee, I can't wait to go see my teller today.
Right. Yeah. and it's really hard to think of any professions where you get that luxury, where you see people more or less on their best behavior, more or less really excited about what you're doing. And it's a break from their own reality. So if you're having like the worst month of your life, you still need to go out and eat something or drink something, and and they just want it to be pleasant, and we deliver that.
I will say, as a server and a bartender, my favorite thing were when people came in really upset, because I took it as a challenge. Like, I'm going to make this person real happy. They're going to be happy that they came in here. They're going to be happy. Like, they may not have been happy when they walked in, but they're going to be happy when they leave. That was always something that not that I was like, cheersing to all my friends in the back of the house, like, woohoo, I got an asshole on table 20, Right. But I could tell, like, someone's coming in and they're frustrated, their day maybe wasn't going great, or specifically as being a bartender, like, they would typically vent to you and tell you about their frustrations, and if you could make them laugh and make their day just a little bit better, I do think that is something that the restaurant and bar world that people do overlook on how much of an impact that we can have on people's everyday lives.
Well, and that's why I know you're a real hospitality in that regard, because like a lot of people will be like, oh, that there's a real asshole at table 34 right now, and
right.
Screw that, but like real people, real hospitable people are like, challenge accepted. I'm going to turn that friend upside down, or at least make it to where I'm going to win you over.
Right.
You're going to be on my side by the end of this deal.
Right. You're going to know that you're in a safe space and that I'm going to take care of you. And we're going to be in this journey together throughout your dining experience. Yeah.
That's right.
Loved it. Yeah. Well, I wanted to start off the episode with, I think I mentioned this to you, that we're going to have each guest on the show will ask the next guest on the show a question without knowing who the next guest is.
Oh, I love it.
So you don't know who my previous guest was because the episode hasn't aired yet. However, it will air tomorrow. And that is Judy Allen. And so she has asked you the question of, if you were stranded on a deserted island, and you only had like one type of food you could eat and consume for the rest of your days. It doesn't have to be like one last meal, but like one genre of food. What would it be?
A genre? Like,
yeah.
So I could say...
Yeah, you say Italian or whatever.
Tough call. I've thought about this a lot, just given the nature of what I do with alcoholic beverages. About what's your desert island wine or beer? I don't know if I've ever been asked cuisine. Crap. Screw it. Tacos. I don't know. Like, just, I don't know. Like, if it can be truly like all incomes, like, corn tortilla, flour tortilla, fillings don't matter. I don't know. Like, there's breakfast tacos, dinner
tacos.
It's just, yeah.
Birria tacos. You can have so many different types of tacos.
Yeah, I made some really fun.
Tacos are delicious.
Yeah, I made some great, like, braised short rib tacos last week. It was kind of cold out, so I was like, let's get kind of spicy. And
what kind of relish did you put, or any kind of thing? What did you do?
Well, yeah, I'm no chef, but I did. I went to Las Americas and got some dried peppers. So we did some dried chipotles and some guajillo peppers, and making a little chili paste out of that. And I had kind of the braising liquid was that chicken stock, some beer, some tequila, some other stuff. And
no chef. Yeah, you're no chef. Yeah,
I like doing it. I like to eat.
No, I meant that as a compliment. It sounds quite composed, as if a chef would have made it.
I think. Well, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but I think if you're a beverage person, I think you have to. There's a requisite understanding, and I'm not going to disparage back of house, but I think a lot of back of house people tend to lean into I'm creating the food, and you beverage people, you get on board with what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm not saying it's everyone, but I think that's kind of a general attitude. And so I think for me, getting into cooking was, one, I like to cook, and B, I want to kind of understand what those chefs are doing, like how to build layers of flavor, how to build complexity, things like that. And so it's a win-win. Like, I'm learning more about what I do as a beverage guy, and I'm eating well. But that being said, most chefs don't think about what the Fernandez does with maybe beverages that they're pairing with their cuisine. But I think really good beverage professionals have to think about. They have to. It's I tell my students this all the time when you talk about food and beverage as a marriage. It's like I watch a lot of old movies. It's like watching Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dance. Fred Astaire is leading the show. Fred Astaire is the cuisine. That's the food.
Right.
That's what the chef's doing. And Ginger has to kind of follow suit.
Right.
But a lot of people like to look at Ginger.
Right.
And if everyone's doing their job, Fred makes Ginger look better, Ginger makes Fred look better.
Right.
I think the food is Fred, and the beverages are Ginger.
I love that comparison. That is, I might steal that from you. I mean, but it's very true that, and Jared and I kind of talked about this a little bit in a previous episode where, that whole line drawn between front of the house, back of the house is something that we both have managed to steer away from. I mean, I married a chef, for example. Yeah. I always hung out in the back of the house. It was always much more interesting back there as far as like colorful people and language maybe being used and things of that. But it is a dance. It's a teamwork. You have to work together. You can't have this, division. Otherwise, you're not putting on a successful show.
I think one of the great trends in restaurants in general, and it's been going for a little bit, was breaking down those walls. When I started in the industry, it's like, I remember working in the formal dining room of Southern Hills Country Club, which was one of my early jobs in the industry. And, those guys, what are they doing? What is that going on back there? They're obviously creating these expensive, nice things, and they don't seem to care one iota about what I'm doing, and I'm interested in what they're doing, and they will maybe, there's a bit of kind of a Berlin Wall built up between.
Totally, it's their fault. It's his fault. It's
right,
passing the buck.
Yeah, and I think one of a good healthy restaurants or any sort of concept, there is at least some back and forth between. The left hand knows what the right hand's doing.
Right.
Type of a thing.
There still has to be a slight bit of friction there, too, to push the other ones to go want to do better. And it can't be all, perfect all the time. You have to have a little bit of competition, a little bit of edge, I think, personally. But I think it should be a team, a unit.
Yeah, there are situations, and you've probably been in one before, and I have as well, where it's like, it's almost like an antagonistic relationship. It's like, we're on the same team. Like, I don't know why you're beating me up because I need a little more, the guy wants more vinaigrette. And I'm just asking you because he asked for it. I'm just relaying the message. And
it's not my fault.
Yeah, or vice versa. Like, the chef's like, why would you not memorize what the daily special is?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That's your job to know that. I created it. I worked hard on it. It's delicious. How can you not convey that to your table? So it goes both ways, right?
Totally.
But yeah, I think when you go to a restaurant, anyone listening out there who's entering the industry, if you are in a restaurant that sort of like has that dynamic, I don't know, like maybe it's lucrative, but you might find a healthier, more holistic relationship somewhere else.
Yeah.
They do exist now.
You say that, though, but I was just thinking in my head as you were talking about how much Trey and I talk about the difference between front of the house and the back of the house in our own home, because it is still very, I wouldn't say house divided, but it is like, when we're entertaining, we work great together as a team. I take care of setting the table. I'm preparing the beverages. I'm doing all of that, right? And Trey's in the kitchen working, and it is like a restaurant. We say behind, we do all of that whilst we're in this mode, of preparing for the holidays and celebrating with our families. It's all like this hustle bustle, but it is very, I do front of the house things, he does back of the house things. And so it kind of made me chuckle a little bit when you gave that comparison.
I think in a different world, I actually was a back of house guy. I just didn't know I was one until I got much older. I like to create, and I like to, put on a podcast or put on some music and just bang stuff out. Maybe I'm getting older and more curmudgeonly. I don't know. I'm not here for the party. I'm here for let's just get the work done and get the hell out of here.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's get our closing duties and get done. We'll see you guys later. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That's right.
Well, since we're talking about celebration, right, and the holidays are kind of like on the cusp of wrapping up, but we do have one, I guess, I don't know if you would consider it a major holiday, but major in the sense for our industry as far as champagne sales are concerned. So I kind of thought that we would talk a little bit about sparkling wine, but maybe hyper-focusing a little bit on champagne. And I want to know from the professor, why do people associate celebration with champagne? Like, why are those things such an interlocked marriage?
I love that we talked about, you said let's maybe talk about champagne. I love champagne, sparkling wine. It is, at one level, very prominent and also I think really underrated as far as a beverage for a lot of reasons. But let's talk about champagne.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard to talk about bubbles without talking about champagne. Champagne, long story short, before, I don't know if they even knew the terms branding or marketing or whatever, but going back to 150, 200 years ago, they really were smart and saying, hey, I don't know how much in history you want me to get into this, but...
No, I love it.
They essentially... well, let's start from the beginning as best as we can. The secret of champagne, what makes champagne so amazing and so novel at the time and why it's still so great. The Champenois, like they were the first people if you're making any sort of wine, to be very rudimentary about it, you're introducing yeast into some sort of sugar-rich, liquidy environments, in this case, grape juice. And that yeast is going to gobble up the sugar in that liquid and create alcohol and also CO2, carbon dioxide. The Champenois were the first people to really figure out, hey, that CO2 sort of escapes into the ether if you're making normal wine. What if we do X, Y, Z, and we can talk more about it if you want to, and retain that sort of that sparkle, that effervescence.
Right.
And suspend that in the liquid. So when people pop that bottle open, it's just as fizzy as it would have been. And if you really think about, say, 200 years ago, what that would have been like to have, we live in a world where everything is sparkling and effervescent. We have soda pop and sparkling water and kombucha and God knows what else, things that kind of are fizzy. How amazing is that? That is truly a gift that is so rare. And from there, I think they knew they had something. If you look at Champagne compared to Burgundy, which we can talk about just really briefly, they essentially grow a lot of the same two grapes. Both regions do Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Right.
And so they've sort of competed in terms of their crops. So that's what they were. It was a sort of produce.
Right.
For lack of a better word, historically, for a long time. Burgundy probably has the better climate still today to make still wines from those grapes. But the Champenois figured out, like, hey, we got something here. We figured this little sort of technological hack. And still, Champagne this day is still one of the most, technically difficult wines to make well. Certainly requires a lot of input. We live in a world where there's sort of this sort of natural wine, sort of like, let's go back to, less is more type of way of winemaking.
Right.
Champagne's still highly technical. And they figured it out, and we can talk about that, but they saw what it was, and they saw that it was just convivial and wonderful and bubbly and effervescent and the embodiment of celebration, and they marketed it so well starting in the 19th century, moving on forward as a luxury product. Go Google old champagne ads. Like if you're listening right now, go look at old champagne advertisements, and you'll see the names like Veuve Clicquot and Vicomte Simon and things like that, talking about and just the way they look and the way they position it. It's like gentlemen in top hats and women in elegant nightgowns and being like, for the celebratory moments. That was very much the marketing position for it, and we don't even question it anymore. It just is sort of like, oh yeah, it's a birthday.
Something to celebrate,
New Year's. Yeah, get the bubbles out, whether it's champagne or cava or prosecco or what have you. It's just sort of like, yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, when you were painting that picture, when you were talking about the, imagine before, we lived in this world of effervescence, like how that would, I immediately thought whomever opened that bottle it would just kind of like pop out, and it would be like this joy and giggle, kind of like, oh my God, what was that? Like as in like you would in a celebration or something like that. So I could see how immediately from the beginning of just discovering, if we put this lid on it and then we open it, it explodes, or like, a volcano kind of type event happens, and you're excited, and what is that? How does that work? And then it could easily transition to, this is what we bring when we party, when we're celebrating, when we're, congratulating someone or something akin to that.
It's almost akin to, if I can make an analogy, pre-radio, pre-Spotify, pre-anything. The music if you hear any music, it's maybe what's being created in your home, or maybe if you go to church. But then what if you had the good fortune of going to a symphony performance?
Okay, yeah.
What is that? I mean, that is going to be blow your mind, like an orchestra playing Wagner or something like that. It just be so rare and so special. And I think that at least what Champagne was, and still to some degree is. Wow, this is really special. This is a unique thing that I don't get to enjoy all the time. And wow, look at what we're doing here,
So when did you kind of gain this knowledge that you have? Is this something that you kind of learned throughout your years, or were you always obsessed with or intrigued by bubbles? Is that something that's always grabbed your attention, or is it something that it has developed later?
I think that if I can bring myself to be, forward thinking is not the right word, but maybe open-minded about what bubbles can be. I kind of saw it early on as something that was more than just, oh, it's New Year's Eve, oh, it's a wedding. It's like, this is just good to drink.
Right.
This is kind of nice. It does lots of things, and I'm certainly happy to talk about it. You know, it is way more food friendly than we give it credit for. Darn if I don't, you know, take the heat off of a hot October day, or Oklahoma day. Well, October. It's late at night.
Hey, there can be some hot October days.
Actually, yeah.
There can be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually true. But you know, it beats the heat. It's refreshing. It's never a bad idea.
No.
Hardly ever. It's like if you're having a bad day. I had an Aunt Timmy. I have an aunt whose name was Timmy. Great piece of advice, and I will pass this along to all of you listening. She called me Tonio, and she talked like movie starlets from like the 1930s and 40s. So she sounded kind of, I don't know, the way people talked in movies back then. That's the way she actually talked. And I can't do it, but she would say, hey, you know, Tonio, you should always keep a bottle of champagne in your refrigerator because you'll never know when you need to celebrate something.
Yes.
Which is a wonderful way to look at the world, right?
Yeah,
like, yeah, something beautiful, something perfect and great and good news could happen at any day now.
Right.
You know, and you should be ready to enjoy that. And so I haven't say I've, you know, 100% of the time always had a bottle of bubbles in my fridge, but I've got a bottle of bubbles in my fridge most of the time.
Most of the time.
And by the way, if you're, you know, if I'm having a bad day or my wife comes home and is having a bad day, and it's a Tuesday, well, bubbles didn't make it worse, right? So
right.
Let's have some champers and make it a little better, or cava or whatever.
Right.
Whatever we got.
So, I mean, obviously, I feel like you and I have been in the industry for a while, and we understand that there are different types of sparkling, but there may be people out there that are unfamiliar and just assume that anything sparkling is champagne. So, I mean, we know that it has to be made in the Champagne region in order for it to technically be called champagne, but a lot of people just refer to anything sparkling. Oh, grab that bottle of champagne, grab this, whatever. And it wasn't, I almost tend to think that maybe it wasn't until like 10, maybe 12, 15 years ago where Prosecco was really kind of making a push into our market here in Oklahoma that people really started to think outside of the box and knowing that there are other things out there than champagne. So I also know that there are other things than Prosecco and champagne, but what are they? What are more?
I think if we're talking about the main categories, and I would like to focus a bit more on champagne because I think it's really, they are the ones who really pioneer the technology of essentially keeping that, you know, the carbonation in the bottle. You know, champagne is preeminent in the world of sparkling wine, but you can't not talk about cava in Spain,
right?
Which actually now cava is the Cava Dio in Spain is the biggest. They make more sparkling wine than anywhere else in the world at this point.
I didn't know that. But
they're cranking out. It's a huge Dio. We can talk about a bit, but they make a lot of it, and it's almost always at a price point that is underneath champagne. Mm-hmm. So there is value there, but it's made more or less the same way. You have Prosecco out of Italy, which is a runaway success story. I did hosted a presentation, or I guess a panel discussion on sparkling wine. It was at the Philbrook Wine Experience in 2022. You work at Philbrook, and you know, the whole topic of it was during, we were still kind of coming out of the pandemic, and that slot had always been sort of reserved for, let's do a champagne tasting. There's always been a champagne tasting at PWE. In this case, it was like, well, you know, the pandemic sort of disrupted some of our supply chains. So how do you get to celebrate with something great without doing champagne? And so we did a non-champagne bubble seminar. And one of the things I did, let's throw Prosecco in there. And something that I've often done since I've been a wine professional was look at the very first wine book I ever bought, which was the first edition of Karen McNeil's book called The Wine Bible.
Yes. Okay.
I think she's on her third edition of it now. It's a great book. I think the first edition came out in 2000, so I bought it when it was brand new. And I looked at Prosecco. I was just like, let's see what she had to say about Prosecco in the year 2000. And I kid you not, there were 2 paragraphs total on Prosecco.
Isn't that crazy?
And the name that, if anyone is a student of wine now and knows what the grape of Prosecco is, you might know it as Glera, Glera. It wasn't even called that back then. It was just the Prosecco grape. And this
Really?
is no one cared. It was just one of those things that, like, eventually people in, say, California started calling their sparkling wines Prosecco and blah, blah, blah. People started co-opting the term Prosecco.
So
And
Prosecco doesn't have the same thing then with champagne. Like you can call... Okay, you're getting there.
No, yeah. And so what they did was essentially, no, this isn't just some sort of like, Prosecco is now a region.
Right.
The grape is called Glera, and you can't infringe on our territory.
So they took
called
ownership
Prosecco.
of it.
Kind of like champagne. Like you can't, no one in the EU can call their sparkling wine champagne. It can be as delicious as it wants to be. It can't be champagne if it's not made from champagne. Prosecco, from the year 2000 when that book came out, or when at least she wrote that section of that book, it was like, no one cared.
No one cared.
It has since become one of the great runaway success stories in all of Italy. We drink a lot of Prosecco in this country now, and people.
Yeah.
And it was barely codified. No one really cared, and it was not a thing that was really that important to even write about. And now it's one of the top sparkling wine choices on the planet, certainly in our market. So you've got champagne, you got cava, you got Prosecco. Couple of places that do some sparkling. Germany does some sparkling it's called Sekt, S-E-S-E.
I don't think I've ever had any of that.
Yeah, you're seeing more and more of it. Typically made from Riesling, but often made from other grapes. Very much produced like Prosecco. I'm maybe jumping ahead of myself there a bit on how it's produced, but there's that. And then something that's really sort of trending with kind of the natural wine set or the cooler set is something called, you'd call something sparkling wine called Method Ancestral or Pet Nat. These are essentially sparkling wines that are made in a single fermentation. So you start a fermentation like you would a normal still wine, and then you dump it in a bottle and cap it, cork it, whatever, and the fermentation completes in the bottle. And so you get this really natural effervescence from a single fermentation. Everything else I've mentioned, by the way, champagne, Prosecco, cava, etc., is a product of 2 fermentations.
Right.
You make a still wine first, and then you create the bubbles in the wine. And
right.
So, anyway.
And that's kind of what sets it apart, essentially.
Yeah, it's why it's so hard to make. And again, I can jump around and talk about this all day long. I like it a lot. What the people of Champagne figured out, the winemakers of Champagne, when you ferment a wine, yeast gobbles up sugar, creates
right.
yeast, CO2. They figured out essentially, if you do a secondary fermentation in a bottle by adding, say you got that still wine, you add a little mixture of sugar, wine, and yeast, drop that in the wine, cap it, it reignites a second fermentation, which boosts the alcohol content of the wine a little bit,
right?
But creates all that CO2, that carbon dioxide, that would normally escape into the ether,
right?
But we've captured it. If you've ever noticed, even on like a really cheap, crappy bottle of sparkling wine, like a J. Roget or a Tots Andre situation, it's really heavy glass.
Right.
Because you've got like 5 to 6 atmospheres of pressure inside that bottle.
Right.
Which is like more than your car tire has. It's like, it really is like kind of a volatile thing. And so I would imagine most people listening to this have probably had some sort of mishap opening a bottle of sparkling wine. Things like that. Because, think about what happens if you punctured your car tire with a knife or something like that. It's really volatile stuff. And you can't use recycled glass. You can't use thin glass. You can't use... It has to be this really thick stuff. So even like the crappiest bubbles on the planet still come in these like really kind of heavy duty bottles because you have to do it because it's kind of dangerous.
Well, before you were talking a little bit more about Champagne and how much things have changed in that region and how what's going on in that aspect of the future and the current status of the region.
So I'm so excited about what's going on in Champagne now. But before we talk about what's happening in Champagne now, let's talk about what's in the books. So if you have a wine book at home, if we're talking about, let's talk about like good wine in general. Champagne is always considered one of the great wines of the world. Great wines of the world historically have been made from, say, estate-grown grapes. You talk about like the great houses of Bordeaux or the domains of Burgundy or what have you. It's like, we grow the grapes, we make them that way, and whatever. All the wines are vintage dated in those regions. So this is a snapshot of, 2005 or 2010 or whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Like a yearbook of that vineyard.
It's a snapshot, like this is what that growing cycle gave us that year, and we talk about it, and we write about it, and it's great or it's not so great or whatever. And then, great wines always talk about, we really talk about terroir, not just the climate that a wine's grown in, but the soil, the subsoil, the slope, proximity to water, where it sits on, relationship
the
to the equator.
geography of the region,
And then also a little bit of, the human element. I think there's the local indigenous knowledge, the X factor, the people that make the wine, how they tend the vineyards and whatever. Champagne is none of those things historically. Champagne is really, if you talk about champagne historically, it's been made from grapes that come from all over the Champagne region, which is a pretty big region, large swath of what we might call northern France, not super far north like, say, Normandy, but due south of there. About as far north as you can go where grapes can reliably ripen historically. So it's grapes from all over this region, made by big Champagne houses, so fill in the blank. Your Veuve Clicquots, your Moët Chandons, your Tattingers, your Piper Heidsieck's, your Pommeries, Perrier-Jouet, on down the line. And it's, from all over the region, Pinot Noir from the Montagne de Reims and Chardonnay from the Côte de Blanc and on down the line. And you blend it all together. And it's the best of this growing region.
Right. The whole region.
Yeah. It's that. It's also non-vintage.
Right.
In a lot of ways. So we talk about in, say, Bordeaux and Burgundy and wherever, Barolo and Brunello de Montalcino, and all. We talk about the vintages being great or not so great. Champagne's always been non-vintage, and that's in part because it's been such a marginal climate historically to ripen grapes. It's, grapes don't always ripen super well up there, which is sort of on that razor's edge. You want grapes to not be super ripe. You want good acidity, but you don't want overripeness or whatever. It's always one of those things, like, it's kind of right there, like, because it's barely, historically going to happen. You want to hedge your bets by maybe getting from other regions. Like, okay, so maybe the grapes in the Vallée de la Marne didn't ripen up that well. Well, we still have contracts with people in the Aube that can still sell us these grapes, and and so there's that. And so you maybe reserve wines from good vintages. I think, and I'm sleeping on it's too late in the night, but I think there used to be a law in the books, like Champagne houses by law had to reserve 20% of the wine from every single year to blend back into other vintages in the event that there was a off vintage, or at least a poor vintage where the grapes there wasn't much of a harvest to be sold. And again, that was about protecting your turf. It was about, we need to make sure, if nothing else, the whole analogy of a rising tide lifts all boats, and maybe a lowering tide grounds all boats. As long as there's champagne being sold out in the market, that's probably a good thing for all of us.
Right.
And so they would essentially put back a lot of their wines to be reserved for another day. And so that's why most wines in Champagne, except for the vintage wines, Dom Perignon, Cristal, those things, which cost several $100 a bottle, are non-vintage because it's historically been a blending of multiple vintages. And last, I think that's really interesting about Champagne is that you talk about, say, Burgundy, it's always been an expression of terroir, of the vineyard, things like that. In Champagne, it's always been an expression of the house style, like how, say, Bollinger is different than Taittinger, or how Krug is different than Salon, or something like that.
Well, what's making them different if they're made from the same grapes? Is it the age, like how long they're spending in fermentation? Like what are their styles? How are they making them?
Long answer to that one. Probably the easiest way to answer that would be certainly different blends of grapes. So there's three grapes. There's Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. And they all contribute something unique to a blend of Champagne. Not everyone uses all three, but
Or the same percentages of all three, right?
Or the same percentages of all
Yeah.
three, right? But I would say that there is one, what grapes you're using, what is the percentage of those grapes, where are you sourcing them from, how long are you aging them on lees, like so in the caves, like, by law, champagne has to be aged for a minimum of, I think, 18 months before release. In many cases, it's much longer than that. So if we're talking about, say, again, vintage champagne, it might be 10 years or longer on lees, which means in contact with the yeast, essentially, developing that complexity, things like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and on down the line. And then, there's so much that goes into it, right?
Right.
But what's interesting about all of that is to say, most wineries, Burgundy is a good example of saying like, well, this is the vintage, this is what the land gave us, this is what the climate gave us, this is the weather gave us, Champagne has been about essentially like making a brand like Coca-Cola. If you had Veuve Clicquot on your wedding night, and it's your 10-year anniversary, the promise of champagne is it's going to taste the exact same way you tasted it.
Right.
Most wines, great wineries don't work that way, but champagne works that way.
Yeah, you can taste them all side by side and can tell the differences in different vintages. But champagne, you're saying, is it's the same.
Historically, it's let's make it the same. And so just to kind of recap, it's grapes from all over the region. Champagne's full of them, so the three grapes, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. It's non-vintage, but it's not a snapshot of a particular growing cycle. It's, one of many potentially.
Sure.
And it's really about the house style, like how they're making it, and not about, say, letting the land express itself. And that is historically what champagne is.
Historically.
Except it's not anymore.
Okay.
Or it's kind of both.
Okay. So tell me more about that. What are we branching into? I have a feeling that it has something to do with more kind of like grower champagnes kind of making their way in there and maybe breaking up the traditional way of looking at things. But you are far more the expert than I am in this subject, so I'm curious to know more.
Well, you bring up grower champagnes, and that's exactly one of the first things I'd like to talk about. Most of these sought after kind of culty champagnes now. Of course, the ones made by the great champagne houses. Again,
right. Your Veuve, your
Clicquot, all that stuff. We've already said them already. They still fetch a pretty penny at retail or in the restaurant, right? But this sort of grower champagne, farmer fizz, whatever you want to call it, it's basically people who grow grapes. If you look at the history of champagne, you had this really technologically advanced wine that no one really knew how to make. It took a long time for people to catch up with them, right? So you had a lot of people who farmed in Champagne who maybe knew how to make rudimentary still wines, but had no idea, or the technology to know how to make sparkling wine. So Champagne quickly became a region of people who farmed and people who made the wine.
Right.
The people who made the wine had all the money, and the people who farmed, as has always been the case, have been the ones who've sort of been manipulated and have had to fight for this to keep food on their table.
Right. To put it into terms I feel like people would maybe understand, or at least in Oklahoma maybe, is you have your farmers who are growing your corn, for example, right? And then they are selling the corn to a large factory that's making tortillas and know how to make tortillas, but the farmers don't know how to make tortillas. But now those farmers are saying, yeah, I'm going to not only grow the corn, but I'm going to make the tortillas as well.
That's a good analogy. I'm integrating we're going to be essentially vertical in that process.
Right.
So eventually, I think if you want to look at some people like Anselm Solos might be the first. If anyone knows Champagne, their Solos is really, really coveted one-on wine. A couple $100 a bottle if you can get your hands on it. Be what, I'm going to, in some cases, selling grapes to the big champagne houses, that works out. But in some cases, these champagne houses are trying to reduce costs, things like that. Who are they going to take care of? Not the farmer, right?
Right.
Not the grower. And so a lot of growers are sort of taking that agency, hey, I think I can actually do this on my own, so I'm going to do it. And so that's bringing out the idea of grower champagne. Starting with a winery like Solos, Pierre Peters might be another out there, Gaston Chiquet. We still live in a paradigm where non-vintage or multi-vintage is a thing, because that's historically has been sort of let's reserve some from a previous good vintage because next vintage could be anything knows, although we live in a world where the climate's changing and they could probably do vintage wines admittedly every year they want to.
Right.
Say 50 years ago, it might have been like 2 or 3 times a decade you could do it. Now it's like maybe every year you could do it. But you're basically people who are farmers are kind of wresting control from these big houses. And I don't want to assume that it's better. I'm not saying big is bad, little is good.
No, it's just different.
They can do this now. Both people can make a good product, but you do have more people taking control over their own production and making more money for themselves. And I think if you are a fan of the little guy or the farmer or whatever, it's a real success story. And what you're starting to see now because of that is you're seeing less of this whole, Champagne to be a total snapshot of the entire region. The Chardonnay comes from this corner and the Pinot Noir comes from this corner. It's like, no, we grow these grapes in this little corner of, our vineyards are in the Côte de Blanc and we have this and this is what we make and whatever. And by the way, it is a bit of a snapshot of at least what happens in this growing cycle in this part of the world. So you're not seeing a lot of vintage dated stuff yet, but I'm going to predict as the region keeps warming up, you're going to see more vintage champagne and you're going to see more, talking less about Champagne as a big region, more about specific, vineyards in Champagne, things like that. It's a little bit on the books already, but it's going to be, I think 10 years from now, more like Burgundy and less like Champagne. We're talking about very specific sites where these things are being produced in various small quantities. And so it'll be really, really cool to experience that. It'll be certainly on the, in the case of sommeliers or wine retailers, to be able to explain these things to their customers.
Yeah, it's an excellent story. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but to me, it sounds like it could be the silver lining of climate change.
No one talks about the good things that climate change does for people.
I don't know if that's right or wrong to say, but it's one of the few pluses I've heard. So,
well, it's I think it was 2009 was a real tipping point for Champagne because the vineyards got hotter there than ever, and if you were going to be real classist about what Champagne should or shouldn't be, a lot of people freaked out. And like people who make Champagne, whatever, like this is too ripe. This is not the real Champagne. And they made wine out of it anyway because you have to make wine out of it because that's what the year gave you. And people liked it. And so I think there's a gradual change in what Champagne's going to be, but also with climate change, you're seeing the boundaries of where wine can be produced shifting. Mm-hmm. Both in relation to the equator, farther north and farther south.
Right.
And so you, for example, have a burgeoning sparkling wine industry in southern England now.
Yes, yeah, that's so true. Tony, I didn't even think about that when I put this together at all. But yes, you're 100% right. I don't know how I overlooked England. Yeah, that is a little success story in its own.
Yeah, 50 years ago, it would have been laughable. If someone said, I'm going to do...
Yeah, totally.
You just wouldn't, that's, you'd be a real crackpot. And now they're now, there's English Wine Awards. Like they're again, England's climate is marginal enough where they can only really produce sparkling wines. It's not a big, there's not a lot of sunshine hours in a growing cycle. There's not a lot of heat temperatures in there.
Right.
But it's kind of what Champagne was like, say, 50, 100 years ago. That's kind of what you're looking at temperature-wise in England now. And some of the wines are really dynamic and really great. Probably the best bottle of bubbles I had this past year, was a bottle of English bubbles.
See, I have yet to have any. I'm dying. That would be very interesting. In a perfect world, I would have it in England, right? But I'll take it stateside too, if push comes to shove.
Yeah, and the weird thing is, it actually kind of goes well with fish and chips. I don't know, but yeah, they really are doing these really dramatic, psychedelic levels of acid, but also like just beautiful fruits. Like, yeah, crazy. Like you look at like the pH of these wines, and they're like, this is how are they doing this? But they're doing it, and they're great. And this is a couple years ago now, but a big. Watershed moment in, I guess, sparkling wine history was when it was Taittinger, one of the bigger champagne houses in Champagne, bought land in southern England. No French company or investment group, whatever, had ever done that. And it's basically a tacit admission and being like, yeah, this is kind of where the ball's headed. Like, Champagne's going to be a Champagne, but what if it's not? Maybe we hedge our bets and buy some land up there and see what happens.
Okay, there's no way in chance, though, that, like, they would ever give up the title of Champagne being made in the Champagne region. Do you think?
It would still always be Champagne and Champagne. They're not going to call English Champagne Champagne, but if you want to see where the ball's headed and maybe want to diversify your portfolio.
Right.
And this is thing, Champagne houses, they've always been, pretty, they've had deep pockets. And so if you look at just our country in the U.S., the sparkling wine producers in this country, Roederer Estate, one of the great producers in Anderson Valley, Chandon, Mom Napa, Piper, Sonoma. These are all Champagne houses in France who have diversified into the U.S. And have also done that in other parts of the world. They've got wineries in Argentina or Australia, places like that, China now, where those names, those big house names, are also there. So, they're still kind of they're kind of spread out all over the place. But I don't know, something about going to England is just one of those uniquely crazy things, because it really is out of the historic growing zone where wines can even grow. Like, if English could have grown wine grapes,
they would have done
centuries ago.
Yeah, centuries ago.
They would have done business with the French if they had to. Those guys have warred for centuries.
Right.
Like, they didn't want to,
so even fast forward many, many years later, for them to buy land in England, I mean, it really says something about where the industry is going, for sure.
Where the climate's going,
I do have one, total off, well, it's not completely off. A friend of mine that I went to high school with in actually Okinawa, Japan, he and his wife he's worked in California and they live in Paso Robles, and she is a winemaker, and he, I think, worked as kind of like a farmer and helped grow. But they recently started and branched out and started their own company called Haliotide Wines. Have you heard of them?
I have not.
I've had it's a sparkling, that's really great. When I get it in, we'll get together and we will crack that bottle together, because I'd love to hear your opinion and just to see your thoughts on, something that a friend of mine made. I think it's so cool. But
I would love to know more about it. I think one of the ways that you see younger winemakers in California try to maybe make a name for themselves or differentiate themselves, you don't see a ton of this, but you're seeing some of it, and that's sparkling wine.
Right.
Because it is maybe done by a handful of houses. We talked about Schramsberg is probably the biggest quote-unquote locally owned one. But yeah, people like your friends or some of the people, it's like, there's some random guy over there growing Albarino. I don't know why, but maybe he'll sell it to us, and we can, no one maybe wants a California Albarino, but they might want a sparkling Albarino, and maybe we can charge a pretty penny for that, and I don't know, give it a try. And
right. I
would guess that's maybe sort of maybe what your friends are doing without knowing anything about it, but it's great, and I do love that that's sparkling wine is getting a little more interesting domestically as well.
Yeah, you've definitely brought in my horizons, and I didn't know a lot of what you were. I mean, as far as the movement of champagne, like the vintages side of it, I didn't realize that was going to be something that potentially could be the future of champagne, and that I find very fascinating, because I feel like, just like you were saying earlier, in all the rest of the world, when you're making wine, everyone, they're taking that year to do a snapshot and putting it in a bottle and saying, this is what 2018 represents from our vineyard, right? And so now to hear that there's a potential that champagne is going to start doing that too, I think that's very fascinating.
It'll be a snapshot of the region that it's from.
Right.
The vintage thing may come a little later than that, but you have a couple of hectares in whatever part of Champagne you're in. You grow the grapes you grow. It's like,
right.
Here's what we got. This is what we're doing. And that's what this wine tastes like from the Côte de Sézanne. Or
who carries
whatever.
Pierre Pieters in here in Oklahoma?
Who's a distributor for it?
Yep.
I think it's Thirst still.
Okay.
It's part of the Skurnik portfolio. Actually, it's part of the Terry Thies, which is sort of within.
So that was the champagne. Champagne. That was the grower champagne. That was my first introduction to grower champagne, and that was our bottle that we celebrated our wedding with.
That's amazing.
And so we have it every year. But I've also noticed, the reason why I bring it up is because I've noticed that every year that we buy it to celebrate on our anniversary, it's getting more and more and more expensive than it was when we first started with it, which is great. I mean, it's a fantastic bottle, and I'm happy to see that they're doing well and that they're, increasing their value. That's awesome. But it just makes me wonder, with all of what you just shared with us now, if that's part of the reason, is that it's gaining more popularity, they're growing, and they're having more pride in it, maybe expanding, who knows, but.
Yeah, Pierre Peters, they're a grower. They're one of the bigger growers. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the big guys.
Right.
But yeah, they've got a name, and, if there's a grower champagne you can get in Oklahoma or North Dakota or Malaysia, I don't know, Pierre Peters might be one of them,
Right.
So, it's, again, basic supply and demand type stuff. Everyone wants it, and, and it's not for nothing, great champagne. I actually have when I got engaged to my wife, we drank Pierre Peters. It was we set up a deal, I proposed to my wife, we got engaged, and I whisked her away to a vintage wine bar, and there was a bottle of Pierre Peters waiting for us.
Aww.
Yeah, so I mean,
vintage wine bar on 18th.
The old school.
Old school.
Yeah.
So what year did you guys get engaged? You realize, I have to say that I was so excited about the topic and discussing with you that we totally skipped over any of the personal questions I would ask you.
Oh, I have no past, I have no present, I have no future. I just came into being one day.
You're just carried by the wind and you go.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, where was your first industry job?
My first industry job was at Willie's Saloon in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
And what year was this?
The turn of 2000.
So did you and Trevor Tack go to Stillwater in the same time then?
We were there at the same time. We didn't know each other directly. I do remember.
So you don't have matching tramp stamps?
Weird. Yeah. I remember meeting him later on down the line in Tulsa, and I remember, oh yeah, that guy looks like a guy who was sort of running amok in my bar when I was bartending. I got a job bartending about a week after I turned 21. Right before I turned 21, I got in my head that I wanted to be a bartender, and so I went to what was called Cimarron Bartending School. It's now long defunct. I think it's called Blue Label or something now. It's on Brookside. It's a bartending college.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was a thing, and I didn't know that was maybe a sucker bet or a waste of money, but I was like, Mom, I really want to go bartend. Can you loan me $800 so I can go do this bartending school? She's like, whatever, I'll pay you back. And
have you paid your mom back?
I think she said you don't pay me back. I think I paid her back some of it, but I didn't pay her back all of it. I'm probably one of the more illustrious graduates, though, because I really did turn a career into it. I got a degree from that school as I was turning 21. It was over Christmas break, December 15th, my birthday. And it's went back to Stillwater and just ran. I took that certificate I'm a bartender. You should hire me. And I went to every bar on the Strip in Stillwater, and Willie's Saloon hired me, and I'll be forever thankful for that, because that was
the beginning of it all.
The beginning of it all, yeah. In retrospect.
So when did you move to Tulsa then?
Born and raised in Tulsa, went to school in Stillwater, graduated from there, came back in 2002, and started doing things here. My first job in Tulsa was at Southern Hills.
Okay.
Couple other jobs between there and then probably my big break in the business was working for I was Elliot Nelson's first hire ever.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he says that. I think he actually. I
know that you guys have history together because you guys were friends before that, weren't you?
Yeah, we grew up together. We both went to Union High School. We're the same age.
Okay, that's how you, Matt, and Elliot all know each other, is Union.
Yep,
okay.
Yep. And I had some bar experience at that point and some restaurant experience. He had this grand idea of opening up a, Irish beer type
McNally's.
thing. McNally's, yeah, which is about to celebrate its 20th anniversary.
Which is crazy.
Pretty crazy. And he's like, do you want to be my bar manager? And I had nothing really better going on. I was like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess.
Right.
Why
Had
not?
you known.
Yeah, and we
Right?
didn't know what I was doing. We didn't know what we were doing. But we were willing to work, as many hours a day as it took to figure it out. And
But you guys were, I mean, looking back then, I'm sure you felt like, okay, we're just putting in long hours. We don't know what we're doing. But what you two together created changed Tulsa. Like that's a real statement. Those are facts.
Well,
and like Continental, we have talked. Continental and your name has come up on every single podcast that I have done. Now, I will admit, like in the first episode, I brought it up because it's easily the bar that I would probably wish would come back if I had the choice. Like if someone said you can revive one bar that failed in Oklahoma, I would say Continental for sure. I was in love with that place. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was well executed. You were a craft bar before craft bars were in Tulsa. It was amazing. I loved it. And I think because of you and Elliot, and I mean, downtown is totally different than it was back then.
Well, really, you should give the credit to Elliot. I just worked for him. And I think you should all give the credit to Elliot in that he sort of let me or whoever just, he gave them a wide berth to do what they thought was going to be good and what was going to be right.
Sure.
And, when we did the first McNally's in downtown Tulsa, crazy. I mean, I can't not talk about it because it's such a big part of my upbringing. We had 60 beers on draft. Well, they still do, right? It still is.
It's still a part of you.
Yeah. And I remember, if you think about what the bar world was like back then, a couple of things. I remember sitting about a week before the McNally's opened. I was sitting at the Brook.
Yep.
On Brookside, the original Brook. And there were two managers who were just sort of talking there. I'm now neck deep in trying to do my own first bar management gig, and Elliot doesn't really know a whole lot about what he's doing either, and we're all just trying to figure it out. And I'm listening to these two managers at the Brook. Like, this is my entire world, is this bar, and try to make it great, and tried this like grand statement with beer because it was what I was doing. I was 25 and barely 25. And these two managers talking, the thing about it was so just summarily talked about and tossed aside. And it was like, did you hear about this bar that's going in downtown Tulsa? Yeah, I heard it's going to be like a kind of an Irish beer bar. And the guy was like, I'll give it 6 months. And it's like, yep. And I'm like, oh no, what have I got myself into?
20.
I thought we were actually, the what you don't know when you're young, you're like, wow. Is that the way the world really sees it? And I remember people kind of coming in and at least on the beer program being like, being behind the bar. It's like, I'll have a pitcher of Bud Light. Well, we don't have pitchers and we don't have Bud Light on tap. I'll have a pitcher of Coors Light. Well, like I said, we don't have pitchers. We don't do pitchers here. We serve them in proper glassware, and also we don't have that on draft.
Right.
And so we pissed off a lot of people because they didn't know what was going on, but we also found people. Like, there were, for every person that I said no to about
you
Bud
found
Light on
5
draft,
yeses.
whatever, you had somebody that's like, this is cool. That's interesting. Like, they're kind of telling people to kind of, we're going to stand for something that's a little better, and that was, a great thing, disheartening at first, a very initial thing. I remember we actually hedged. Michelob Ultra was a new product at the time, a brand new. So we put it on, I don't know, maybe we'll put it out there. And it went from, I think it was like our top 3 sellers for like the first month or two. And those people didn't ever come back. I want a pitcher of Bud Light, give me the.
I think they're doing just fine.
Yeah, they're doing fine.
20 years later.
And it's just like, let's stick to our guns and kind of be like, we're going to represent, proper beer and good beer culture. And that has evolved in that 20-year time span. But that was.
Wow, I didn't.
Yeah, and it was a very cool thing to be a part of. And it really taught me a good lesson in that stick to your convictions. Do push good forward, right? You don't have
Right.
to settle for mediocre or less than because it's Oklahoma or whatever. And that was
Or
what,
just because that's what the client, the masses is telling you they want, right? Like it's okay to be different.
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Henry Ford, when he was building cars, if he had, you know, asked his customers what they would have wanted, he would have said a faster horse.
Right.
It's like, no, what you want's a Model T.
Right.
You don't want a faster, you want that. And I think that's
Right.
what we're kind of doing there. It's like, you don't want Bud Light, you want maybe a proper German lager or
Right.
something like that. Or maybe, you know, and people found us and it kind of built up a clientele from there and it's still doing just fine today.
Still doing great. Yeah. I think it's awesome. What a success story.
Yeah.
Like, and I think you're right to give Elliot, you know, he deserves a lot of credit. But I have also worked for, or the majority of the credit, I will say. He had the vision, he had, you know, all of this, and he's, you know, he and his company have changed like the imprint of Tulsa for sure. But I don't want to discredit what you've done because I think that your work there and the things that you were able to accomplish helped build it to what it is today. And you've managed to be a success in your own right in your career now. And I think that's awesome.
I'd like to think that's the case. And I appreciate you saying that. I think you brought the Continental, which was, in my mind, it was a short chapter of my life, but it was a chapter of my life that I think a lot of people
I think
liked.
it hit a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that bar it didn't even make it 3 years. It eventually made more financial success. For those of you who don't know where the Continental was, it was essentially where the sidebar of McNally's is now. It was just, here's McNally's, and you look just due east, and that was where the Continental was. And it was a kind of a music club and a cocktail bar before the craft cocktail thing became a thing.
And it had crescent booths and it was just,
It was nice.
it was nice. It
Had a
was
good
very
feel to
well
it.
executed. I loved it. Chandeliers, it was beautiful.
Yeah, it never really made a lot of money, and it actually made more financial sense just to make more McNally's out of it. But for the time there, I was really super into cocktails. I won't belabor the point too much, but I was really interested in doing things that weren't being done in town.
This is true.
Measuring, right?
Yeah.
Fresh citrus, things like that. Things are kind of de
You had
rigueur.
classic cocktails on the list too, which was something that I don't think a lot of people were doing at the time. And now you see, you're still seeing, go to Tina's. I don't know if you've been there yet.
Oh, yeah.
Their entire bar menu is classic cocktails.
Yeah, it was a different paradigm. So you talking about vodka was still kind of what paid the bills. I guess it's still.
Yeah, gin's making a huge rise these days.
Yeah, gin wasn't even really making a comeback at that point. It was a lot. Honestly, we were doing a lot of things like mojitos and caipirinhas.
Yeah.
Vodka-based cocktails were still big. Stirred cocktails were not quite, like Manhattans. No one really had to. I remember doing Negroni. Hey, you should have a Negroni, and people were like, what is this god awful mess?
I did have a Negroni there. I think that was the first time I ever had a Negroni.
Great. No one
Yeah.
liked them back then.
Right, and
people
now
love them
everyone
now.
loves them.
No
Yeah.
one cared. But it was a really cool jumping off point for a lot of people. The original bar staff there, for those of you who know the industry, Matt Leland was our fearless leader. He's still with the McNally's Group today.
Yes.
Has run Yokozuna for forever, and I think he's kind of overseeing some of the more fine dining concepts for the McNally's Group. So Jimmy's Chop House, for example. Brian Fontaine is also with the McNally's Group,
Yes.
VP of Operations. Jonna Hayes, who's kind of the HBIC for Three Sirens.
Right. I didn't realize that she was at Continental.
I think she got smart and left. I think she had a job at if I remember right. Again, this is 20 years ago. I think she had a job at the Stone Horse, which was, has and will always kill. And was making buku money, and she decided to work for a new concept. And oh yeah, this is really cool. I'm not making the money I'm accustomed to making in Union Square. So she kind of went back to that. But that was how I got to know Jonna. Ray Licklider, who's one of the great unsung bartending heroes of this town. He's still primarily his residence is at the Bowl in the Alley.
Yes.
That was the bar staff there. But another guy who came through that really
Heavy hitters.
heavy hitters, and the guy that kind of came through shortly after that, who I think has really changed cocktail culture in Tulsa as much as anyone, is Aaron Post.
Yes, absolutely.
He was the first bartender I worked with who really challenged me as a bartender. I always kind of pride myself on being knowledgeable, being creative, things like that. And here's this guy who was a couple years younger than me.
Right.
I remember he was like, "Hey, let's do a little R&D. Let's come in on a Sunday when we're closed and bring some recipes in, make a new cocktail menu." And I came up with what I thought were like 5 good recipes, and he came in with like 15, and they were all really good. And I was like, this guy's really serious.
Well, and those for you Aaron Post is owner of Valkyrie.
Valkyrie,
And
St.
St. Vitus, yes.
Yeah, and more things to be coming soon.
I'm sure. I
Very
have no
cool
doubt.
stuff. Yeah, he's got some cool stuff about to pop off soon. Probably can't break the news here, but he's about to make some moves.
Spill the beans, Tony. No, I don't. I wouldn't do that.
But that was where I met Aaron, and I think it was sort of like steel sharpening steel. Like, he pushed me to be better. I'd like to think I pushed him to be better.
Yeah.
And that was a good working relationship for a while there. And and he's gone and done amazing things with cocktails. His Valkyrie got shortlisted for a James Beard Award last year, which doesn't happen with cocktail bars anywhere, let alone in Oklahoma.
Right.
So amazing.
It's a great space. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to the next bit of our show, I guess.
Okay.
We're going to share your pro tip. Did you think of one?
Pro tip. I have 2.
Okay, let's
I
hear
have
them.
2. And I'm going to speak. We've had already a couple of chefs on. You've had a great front of house / operator like Jared on. I'll do a bar manager tip. I think when you talk about bar management or being a beverage director or a sommelier, whatever it is, part of what being good at in that role is book knowledge.
Okay.
Knowing, if we're talking about wine, really knowing the world of wine. The minutia of it, like the 33 Grand Cru vineyards of Burgundy, or the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, or the various communes of Barolo, or blah,
Right.
blah, 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 blah. That's good. You should do that. The most important thing you can do as a beverage professional is to really develop in your mind what is greatness to you.
Okay.
And that sounds easier than it actually is. I think any dummy, anyone off the street, dumb, smart, whatever, can taste a wine. A wine rep can come by and say, "Oh, here's this new Pinot Noir from the Russian River Valley of California," and blah, 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 blah. And that tastes pretty good. I'll put it on the list, right? I think basically being able to learn from books what you can learn from tasting, mentorship, experience, things like that. Book learning is easy. If you really want to apply yourself to, if you wanted to, people have done it. If you want to fast track I want to become a master sommelier in 5 years, people have done that before. People have done it less time than that.
Right.
Hit the books and do that, right? But I guarantee those people didn't have enough time to form a requisite knowledge, a worldview of what greatness is, what makes great, and why do you think it's great? Not why Robert Parker thinks it's great, or why this master sommelier in New York thinks it's great. Like, why do you think why this wine is great, and why are you putting it on your list, or why are you putting it on your retail shelf? And be able to defend that and be, chefs get the opportunity of like, well, we create, right? And I guess bartenders, if you're a mixologist or you are creating as well. But for the most part, if you're a beverage professional, you're basically curating an experience, whether it's beer, spirits, wine, what have you. This is why I think this is good. These are not the thoughts of someone else. This is something I've arrived to on my own.
Right.
On my own. I know that sounds really little, But the takeaway from that should be, it's not your wine list, it's not your beer list, it's not your cocktail list, whatever, if it's not you. And if you are, say, putting your wine list up for sale, like say, there's all kinds of distributors who will give you an inducement. Oh, it'd be great if we put this wine by the glass and I'll give you tickets to the next concert at the BOK or
Right.
tickets to the Thunder game. Well, know if you're doing that, know what you're doing. You're a sellout. It's
Right.
not your list anymore. It's
theirs.
yours and theirs, right?
Right.
And so if you want to have integrity about what you do, if you want to have integrity, or in yourself, is you do the work, and I guarantee you, you will evolve. What you think is
Sure.
good and what you will learn along the way. For example, when I was writing wine lists in, say, my 20s or early 30s, I thought, and I did know some stuff, but I know a lot more now, and my tastes have changed now. But I think that just keep it the way, do it your way. Seek mentorship, find people who can teach you things. One thing I didn't have, and a lot of people of our age group didn't have a whole lot, was a lot of mentorship in this town. I really didn't have one mentor. I got some good tips. You can borrow, you can learn a good lesson can be learned from a bad person. Like, well, that's not
Sure. A bad situation. Yeah.
what
not to do. Yeah.
right. So you can learn along the way, but find a good mentor. There are a lot of people in this town now who would be good mentors to you if you're listening to this and you're a bit younger or whatever. But yeah, like, do it your own way.
I like that.
Don't let someone buy it. Don't just copy it for someone else because they said it was the right way to do it. Do it your own way, and learn that way. I think that's really important. That's my pro tip for bar managers. My bonus tip that I think might be more for everyone, and I've it took me a while to realize that this was valuable currency. My very first boss in the bar business, back to Willie's Saloon in Stillwater.
Right.
His name was, I still don't know his first name. It was either Dale Farmer or Dell Farmer.
Okay.
But you got that kind of central element, Dell.
Dale.
Dell, that could be Dale or that could be
Dial.
Dell.
Or maybe
Dell.
Dill. Maybe
Dill Farmer. He farmed very interesting. Anyway, long story short, he bought Willie's Saloon when I started out. He had bought it, and it was really in the dumps. And he kind of like early retirement. It's like, I'm gonna buy this bar and kind of make it cool, and be a place where my buddies would go out and day drink. So every day, we were open 6 days a week. He would just rolling around like between noon and 1, and drink like 8 or 10 screwdrivers and chain smoke, and
All right.
But he'd already made his money. He was an older guy. And
Sure. No judgment.
No judgment, and and he was nothing but wonderful and nice to me. He gave me a job, but he would always just say, between the chain smoking and the vodka and
screwdrivers.
OJ, like, Tony, you gotta love life. You gotta love life, Tony. He says it all the time, and like it was a mantra or a cone, for him. Like, you gotta love life, and like, yeah,
Reminds
whatever.
me of your aunt.
What?
Always keep a bottle of champagne in the fridge.
He's from that era. He would have been roughly the same age as people who lived through the Depression and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
saw some real bad times. He's like, you gotta live life, and I ignored that for a long time. But then you get older and real life happens to you, and things get
Wife and babies.
or just fucked 8 ways from Sunday, and and you're like, wow, it's just a miracle that I'm even here. It's a miracle that my wife is here. It's a miracle that there are trees and there are birds and there's music and all that stuff. And if you can take that perspective and apply that at your worst moments, or in normal, but certainly when things are going bad, when you're in the weeds, literally or metaphorically or whatever. It's easier said than done, but Dale Farmer, one of the greats, booze hounds of Central Oklahoma. You gotta love life. And he said to me over and over again, that's all he ever said to me, other than being really nice to me and giving me a job, and he gave me a promotion. He is long gone now. But I mean, and that's restaurant advice, that's life advice. You know, when things are going bad,
You gotta love life.
you gotta love life, Tony. You gotta love life.
I think you need that tattooed.
Between the Marlboro Reds and the
Oh.
and the screwdrivers, well vodka,
Right.
crappiest OJ imaginable.
That
He was right.
gotta love life.
Life's gonna really kick you in the teeth sometimes.
This is true.
Gotta love it all the same.
No, nothing's perfect. Everything has its ebb and flows.
Yeah,
Gotta love life.
yeah. And so that's really been, I don't know, that's gotten me through some hard times. That's gotten me through, I don't know,
Life.
what could, sage advice.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. It's beautiful.
I don't know.
I still think you should get it tattooed on you. Gotta love life.
I don't have a tattoo yet, so
Well, that could be the first.
I'm due.
Okay, so we've talked about your pro tips. Let's talk about, I want to hear your question that you're going to ask the next guest that's going to be on that you have no idea who it might be.
I have no idea who's going to be. So I think this is coming from me. I don't know. I'm assuming it's going to be you don't have to tell me, but a hospitality industry person.
Yes.
Okay. My question will be, how did your parents initially react when you told them you were going to pursue a career in the hospitality industry?
That is such a good question.
Yeah.
That is such a good question.
Yeah, I think it's a decision you make at whatever point in your life you made it. And I don't know, the range, it's not like, hey, Mom and Dad, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. Like, oh, great.
Yeah.
Aces, good job. Do it. You're like, I'm going to be a bartender. Like, what? Or I don't know. The range there is pretty interesting. So I'd like to hear someone answer that.
Okay. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, sir, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I wish that we could sit and chat for more, but we can't. So we're going to say goodbye. However, you will be back on the show at some point soon.
I got a lot to talk about.
Yes.
We can talk about.
You've got a lot of knowledge in that noggin of yours.
My job basically consists of sitting in my ivory tower in my office, accruing knowledge, and I descend
And you pass life lessons out to.
come to a group of very young people and say things and just talk at them. And then, so let's say, this is in my wheelhouse.
Yes.
Would be happy to come back.
That would be awesome. And we'll see each other again soon.
We will.
We will. And I was told that John Moss, I don't know if you're aware, but he's kind of like my producer. He's the one who really kind of pushed me to do the show and said was like, there's something there, you should do this kind of thing. He's a little bit of a mentor, I guess you could say, in this area. Mm-hmm. And he has instructed me that I have to tell people to like and subscribe this podcast. So that's me doing that.
Like it, subscribe to it.
Follow it.
It's good to just listen to it, but like the hits really keep coming for Christina when you like or subscribe to it. I'm a podcast guy. I listen to them. I get it. It's going to be, if you like what you're hearing now, this exception not accepted. The other ones are better, but
That's not
it's
true.
because they had good people on them. But you should do that.
That's not true. You heard it here. Listen to Tony.
Hey, cheers.
Cheers.